Hey, this is Joe Lilli with Break into Motion Graphics, here with another tutorial. I've had a lot of interest in this logo animation that I feature on my sites and in the intro to these tutorials, and here it is now. I'll play it for you. So I'm going to show you the steps I took to create that now. Here's the actual original scene file for it. You can see that the logo is actually breaking up through the floor. I've got it fractured into a bunch of pieces, and we're using dynamics for them to kind of spin up into space and collapse and bounce and everything. So if we go to a new scene file, I'll show you from scratch the steps I took to create that. So I like to start with a cube. Tried it with a disc, like a flattened cylinder, but I found that the fracture pattern works better with a rectangular object. So if you go into your cube settings here, make this 7500 by 7500, and zoom out, and 200 is about right. We can maybe go 250, and that's our base shape. That's for the floor. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a plugin called Throsy, and you can get that on a website called nitro4d.com, and it's a free plugin. It's supported on Windows and Mac, and it goes all the way up to the latest version of Cinema 4D R14, and it's really great. Highly recommend it. There's a couple of others out there. There's one called Destruction, I believe, does the same thing. So it's whatever your preference is. I really like this. I've had great luck with it. So you select your cube, go to your plugins, Throsy, and select Throsy. And I like to break it up about 10 pieces initially, just to kind of see what that does. So now you can see we've got this cube is actually broken up into 10 separate pieces. Each one can be moved individually. But what we want to do, that's not going to be nearly enough for our effect. So with it still selected, and with 10 pieces still entered, break it up again. So what it's going to do now is it's going to break up each one of those 10 pieces, subdivide it 10 more times. So you're going to look at about 100 pieces. And it takes just a minute here, but this is going to give us a much nicer break when the logo breaks up to the floor. And you can see now we've got 100 separate pieces, and they're all able to be selected and animated individually. But we're going to let dynamics do the trick. Now, if I were to take this and just hit play, you can see it starts breaking up and falling immediately. And that's because it automatically, Throsy puts a dynamics tag on it. Okay? Well, that's great, but we don't want it to just fall to the floor just yet. We want to wait till the logo actually breaks up and gives it a reason to fall. So go to your shapes here and create a plane. Go underneath. We're going to do with this plane, we're going to make it bigger than the floor, so that it has something to catch the pieces when they break through and fall. So I'll make it about 10,000 by 10,000, and then we're going to just move it just below the floor. If you go to your side view here, you can kind of see what you're dealing with. So here's your Throsy pieces, and then there's your floor plane. You can actually rename that. Floor. Alright, so if you just play now, those floor pieces are still going to collapse because we don't have any dynamics tag on this. So Throsy automatically puts a rigid body onto those broken up pieces, and that makes it kind of collapse and act with physics. But for the floor, we don't want that. If I go to Simulation, Dynamics, and put a rigid body on the floor as well, you guessed it, they're both going to collapse, which, you know, is not what you want in this case. Might be nice for some effects, but so we're going to actually go to Simulation Dynamics, create Collider. Now, Collider is going to be static, and you can see that the floor already starts breaking up. So we can tell your dynamics, instead of triggering immediately, trigger it on collision. So nothing is going to happen until that is actually collided with. And that's what we want. That's our initial state. This is great. So if I create now a logo here. We'll go to Motext is fine for what we're doing. We'll say logo here. Let's bring that up. There we go. Zoom in on it here. So that's not a very cool font. In the one that I did, you can see I used this really nice font that's called Capture It. So we can try that again here. And that is from a website called thefont.com. You'll see it right there. So it's kind of a nice stencil, you know, bulky military style font with some distressed grunge to it, which I kind of like. So we can apply that to this. If you go to your font, capture it, and let's see how that, if I hit H there to zoom out, we could probably make this logo a lot bigger. So let's make this like 1,000. There we go. And take down the vertical spacing so that they're more stacked on top of each other. Probably even go like 600. Let's see. Yeah, we want them almost touching. There we go. Just a little space between them. And we can also middle align them so that they're centered over each other. Now you could get into the topography and say, well, you know, here it needs to be a little bit wider. We could make them two separate layers so we have more control over the kerning. But in this case, for the purposes of this demo, that's going to be fine. So I'm just going to move it down here, sit it on the floor, go to our side view here. Just kind of sit that right on the floor, right in the middle. So that's kind of a nice ending camera angle. This is kind of where you want to be. And keep in mind, you'll probably want to use a wide lens to make it a little more dramatic, but for now this is good. If I go to create a camera, I can make the focal length like 15. See what that does. Okay, 25. A little better. And we'll go ahead to our settings here and make this 1920 by 1080. I always like to work in HD. Only no point to going any less. So for now this is fine. We zoom out just a little bit. So this will kind of be your ending position. And if you want to go ahead and let's make this like 120 frames, and we'll go ahead and keyframe the position and rotation of the camera on that first frame, and then we can always, you know, pull back the first frame. We can zoom around it and everything. So this is where we want to end up, and that's looking pretty good. If you just do a quick little render here. So there you go. We need to apply some materials to everything. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's play around with the dynamics. What's going to happen is if you animate this logo, we'll go ahead and keyframe the Y position of it, because the Y is what you want to animate by the end. So we'll go ahead and move this logo underneath the floor, starting all the way down here, just beneath the floor, and keyframe that Y position, and then go back. You'll see, scrub through it. So it's coming up through the floor. That's great. If we apply our dynamics to that logo, and it moves up through here, it's going to break apart those bricks. So let's go ahead and do that now. So if we go select our logo and we go to Simulation Dynamics, Collider as well. So we want that to be a collider and the floor plane to be a collider. The floor is going to be catching the pieces that break apart, and the logo is going to be breaking them apart in the first place. So now if we go back to frame 1 and we hit play, so it's nice and slow, but you know, in real time, be a little more dramatic. Now, as you can see, these pieces are still not quite small enough. So I'm going to go ahead, go back to frame 1, and we're going to select our Throsy cube, move the floor underneath it. We're going to select our Throsy cube, and I'm going to Throsy it again 10 more times. This might take a while, so I'm going to go ahead and break it and then get back to you. Throsy has broken up that cube 1,000 times, so each piece was subdivided again 10 times, and we've got plenty to work with for our dynamics. I'm going to go ahead and play this and give you a preview of what it's going to look like. Keep in mind there's no textures, materials, there's no lighting. It's going to look a lot better in the end, but as far as the dynamic simulation, here's what we're looking at. Now, one thing that we don't want, you'll notice here, even towards the end of our animation, the logo is moving up nice and smoothly over the course of 4 seconds, but you still have a lot of these big chunky pieces that are stuck in and around the logo, and that's because it's got all these little holes and grooves and places for the pieces to get stuck, and because it's moving nice and smooth and slow. The pieces need to really be hit dramatically in order for them to break and shatter and fly all over the place and make it feel like a big move. Right now it just feels like it's kind of emerging from some rubble. There's a solution to that, and what I found is, if we come here to the side view, I like to create a breaker object that'll actually do the breaking for us. So just create another cube, and we'll kind of move it down here, position it where the logo is. We want to make it slightly deeper, and there we go, slightly taller than the logo itself. And what it's going to do, this is actually, we're going to put the dynamics tag on this breaker object and have it break through the floor nice and quick, and it's going to do the job for the logo. So I'm actually going to go ahead and move the dynamics tag from the logo onto this cube. It's going to be our breaker object. Now, the cube still has a flat surface just like the logo does, so that's not good. That's not going to help us. It's still going to have a lot of pieces get stuck on top of there as it rises up. Okay, so you come around to front view, and we'll make this, let's see. Yeah, there you go. About 3,500 pixels wide. Now you can see it's almost completely encasing our actual logo. So let's go back to this front view. What I want to do is I want to duplicate the cube. I'm going to hold down Command and then left click and just drag up. So now I've got a duplicate cube, and I'm gonna slide that up on top and shrink it down a bit. And then I'm going to come into my side view, and in my side view we're going to go to the object mode here. We can actually select the vertices, and I'm going to scale those in. I'm also going to select the back ones. You can tell I'm not much of a modeler here. And scale those in as well. And now what we have is this cube with this nice pointed object on top of it. That this is what's going to do our breaking through the floor, and all those pieces are just going to slide right off of this thing. Just make it a little shorter here. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and group these two together, select them both, and Alt-G. We'll call this our breaker. This will be our floor breaker. It'll go right down above the logo. And that's got the dynamics tags on it. So that's what's actually going to be, we're going to animate that up through the floor. So we want that just to happen within a short amount of time. The quicker the better, because it'll disperse the cubes more, or the fractured Throsy floor more. So again, I'm going to keyframe by holding the command and clicking on the Y position under coordinates on this breaker object. And then by frame 30, this thing is going to be here. And we'll just do a quick test to see if that's enough, or maybe we need to extend it. So now you can see we've achieved the desired effect. All the pieces are on the floor kind of surrounding the logo, but the logo itself isn't really obscured. I'm going to go ahead and add one of these collider objects back onto the logo by holding down the command, just drag that down to copy it. So, because I saw some of the pieces were actually kind of moving through the logo, and we don't want that. It's ignoring it, acting like it's not there. So we want it to react to the logo as well, but we want that breaker to be the primary thing that's breaking up the floor. So now we've pretty much got our project set up to go, and we can start adding some finishing touches to it. Obviously materials will be important. Let's go ahead and look at that floor. Now when you do a Throssi on an object, it creates two materials. It creates the cut inside and the cut outside. And this is great because this allows us to put kind of a nice glossy sheen to the surface of the floor, but the inside pieces we can add a little noise, make them a little rougher and bumpier and maybe more matte instead of glossy, and a little darker so we can distinguish when it's breaking up the inner from the outer pieces. And that gives us a little bit more realism. I'm going to go ahead and make this the surface here. If we go into our content browser, I've got so many great shaders here. Video Copilot has a bunch of great ones. White plastic. There's a nice smooth white plastic. And I'm just going to put that on the outside one. And I'm going to actually copy that onto the cut inside. And then we'll come here into the cut inside. And I'm going to darken it a little. And I'm going to add a bump. And for that, we'll just do like a noise. Make it like, I don't know, 5%. Global scale, take it down to like 25. So now, when this thing breaks apart, we should see a distinct difference on the inner and outer pieces. Let's do a quick little test here. So you can already see there's some noise on the inside pieces. Outside are a little more glossy. Now, we need to add a light to this scene. I'm going to go ahead and step back here. And I think it could just be really simple. Just a simple overhead light. And then we'll add a soft shadow to that. A soft shadow. And so now we render. That's perfect. We actually want to make the floor and the breaker object not visible. At this point now you can still see the floor in the render and that breaker object when it comes up to the floor. Go to the last frame here. So you'll see that breaker is right there and the floor is still there. And we don't want that. I'm going to go ahead and select the floor, go to Tag, Cinema 4D Tags, and add a compositing tag. And just uncheck Scene by Camera. And that's going to make that floor plane invisible, but it'll still be doing its job of keeping those Throssi fractured pieces held up in space. And I can just take this, select it, and then command drag it onto my breaker object, so that's not seen by the camera either. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Let's come in here, and we could probably go ahead and click this one twice on the breaker, so it's still there, but it's not seen in our scene because it's kind of annoying when you're trying to texture. We could probably even animate the logo up a little more so that we're seeing all of it on the floor there. There we go. And I'll go ahead and keyframe that. And maybe pull back the camera so the whole thing is visible in frame. And then if we do a quick render. Okay. And go back into our content browser. Now, I love Video Copilot. I also love Grayscale Gorilla, and they've got some excellent textures in there. which I just scrolled by. Let's go into their plastic. Let's see if they have a nice, there we go, plastic fire truck. That's going to be our logo texture. So we'll drag that onto our logo. Might have a little much too bump to it. Let's take off that bump and see if that actually gives us a quicker render. Okay, and we also need to move this light so it's actually lighting our logo. And since our in position is kind of at a front 3/4 angle, we can bring it over here a little bit. Maybe right in there. Let's see how that's looking. Got some nice shadows in there. We're getting close. We're still getting some weird dark shadows in here that we'll deal with, but that's getting pretty close to how we want our final look. In addition to the grayscale and video copilot materials, in your content browser you have a ton of great free materials if you weren't aware. So under your broadcast, for example, there's all these great effects materials, glossy, matte, and even more under here, ceramic, concrete, fabric, metal. And if you scroll down under the Prime menu, if you have that, there's additional materials down here, all type of colors and materials, glossy, matte, wood. And if you scroll down further under Visualize, you have even more materials. There's bricks, car paint, ceramic, concrete, floors, with things like carpets, liquids, metals. So if you weren't aware of these, you have pretty much unlimited resources here to choose from. Or you could create your own. Just go to File, New Material, and from this menu, if you want to add reflectivity, you can control it here. Add a Fresnel texture so it has realistic fall off of the reflection, adjust the mix strength, adjust the color here. So there's a lot you can do with materials, whether you want to create your own or use pre-existing ones. Let's start cleaning this up. First thing I want to do to get rid of that shadow along the bottom, we're going to select that breaker object, and in addition to Scene by Camera, we're going to uncheck Cast Shadows and Receive Shadows, and we'll do the same for the floor because those are just kind of helping us with the dynamics, and we don't need to have them interacting with the lighting. And don't forget to turn off the Scene by Raise, Scene by GI for your breaker object and your floor, because we don't want those reflecting in our scene. So now let's set up our camera move. If we go to frame 0 here and select our logo and then switch our display to lines, we can see where that logo is underneath the floor plane. And what we want to do is kind of get, above a reverse 3/4 view, right where that logo is going to break through the floor. And that's going to be our start point, so that we can have this dramatic sweeping camera motion. So I'll go ahead now, select the camera again, and now we're on frame 0. Go ahead and keyframe all those camera values. So now you can see that it's going to break up to the floor, and we're going to come right past everything. That's going to be like right up in the camera there, and then it's going to slowly ease into that ending position with all the rubble or strewn around it. We could probably get a little bit closer, so that first part of the logo there comes right by the camera. Let's see if I can't just scoot this over just a little bit and select the logo again, come just a little bit so that we come a little closer to that letter. Let's see now. So now, yeah, it's going to go right past the camera there. And I think one more time, we'll just scoot this up and over that way. And keyframe that position again. So now, yeah, right through the center of the frame. That's a nice look. Okay. So go back to Giroux shading. Now if we kind of watch this play out, you'll see the floor starts fracturing apart and the logo smashes through. And this is exactly what we want. So go back to frame, go back to the end here. I'm going to save this. You should always try to save your project as much as possible in case there's some crash, which happens. One thing we can do to speed this up is select our Throsy broken pieces, and if you go into the select the dynamics tag there and then go to cache, you see that there's an option for bake, and what that's going to do is actually bake that dynamic simulation into an animation. So then you'll be able to scrub through the timeline in real time. You won't have to wait for it to calculate on every single frame. So let's go ahead and do that now. And you see it says baking dynamic simulation. Takes just a few minutes. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Now when I press play, it's faster than it was before, but it's still not real time. But at least now, if I jump to the last frame, I'll be able to see what it looks like with all the pieces landed, instead of just a smooth surface, because it hasn't been able to calculate the dynamics. Now, let's look at our render settings. We want to turn on ambient occlusion, and we're going to turn on global illumination. Now this is going to make your render time kind of heavy, but on the plus side it's only 120 frames, so it shouldn't take more than a day or two to render if you can just kind of leave this going on its own. So I'll go into the global illumination settings, and we'll set it to IR plus QMC, and we could do camera animation instead of still image. So that's going to give us a little bit faster render. Change the diffuse depth to 3. The gamma's fine at 1. Ambient occlusion, we're going to increase the contrast to maybe like 10%. Let's give us a little more contrast in there. Go back to the global illumination. Everything should be set here to low, because you really don't need anything more than that. So there you go. Now these render settings are settings I picked up along the way from animation various websites and tutorials. Save. Make sure you check. You can disregard them, straight alpha, or even better, I recommend not even using global illumination at all. I believe it slows down your renders a lot. As long as you sketch your width and height already set to out of it, 1080p, so you're probably better off just using the frame range, ambient occlusion, all frames, if anything. That should be it. And then you just have to choose your output path here, where you're going to save it to. So I'll go ahead and do a test render at this point, just to see what we're dealing with. Just render right there in the frame. And it's going to take a little longer, as I said, because of global illumination and ambient occlusion, but it's going to be worth it. You're going to get some nice shadows, nice reflections. That GI is going to fill in those dark areas with some with the ambient light. It's going to be really nice. Here we go. That looks pretty good. We might want to add a fill light back here, just kind of fill in some of these dark shadows, and maybe some kind of a bounce card to give us a reflection across the typeface. And how we can do that is, if you come to your scene, just turn off the camera And we can duplicate this light. You can see that this is pretty far forward, so that's why it's casting those long dark shadows back there. We could affect the shadow settings by coming in here, increasing the shadow map size to 1000 by 1000 from 250 by 250, and then lower the density to maybe like 50% so it's not so dark. But we'll also go ahead and duplicate this and drag it to the back, and we'll turn off the shadow settings for that one. Just turn it to none, because we don't want this one to cast shadows. This is just going to be a filler light. And we'll also make the intensity of this one 50%. And now what I've done, I've added this plane in front of the text, and I gave it a material with everything turned off except luminance at 100% brightness. I applied that to it, and what that does is that's just going to create a nice glowy bounce card that will give us, when this is rendered, just a nice angular reflection across the type, just to give it a little extra pop, make it feel like it's more in the studio. And don't forget the compositing tag on there that has seen by camera turned off. You can also double click that top little button in the object palette to remove it from your scene so it doesn't distract you. And now we're basically ready to render. So let's go ahead and set the output path. Just go to my my renders folder, and this will be our logo break. Go ahead and save. Make sure you turn everything back on into aliasing to best animation, full frame range, and we should be good to go. Now, you could do multipass on this and set up the different ambient, diffuse, specular, reflection, shadow all separate if you really wanted to have control over it, but it's not really necessary. Once you dial in these render settings, it's going to look pretty good in camera, and then you can enhance it in After Effects. You may want to add to your logo a compositing tag and give that an object buffer of 1. Go to your cube and give that a compositing tag. Go to your cube and give that a compositing tag. Give it an object buffer of 2. And we can use the object buffer in here. Just do it twice for 1 and 2. And that'll just give us a separate pass of those two objects. And we'll have a mat for them in case we want to separate them during compositing. Let's do two things. First of all, let's extend our timeline to 150 so that we have enough frames to see all the pieces actually fall and reveal the logo. They're not still hanging in midair. And let's go back to our render settings. We'll uncheck global illumination, just because I don't think you need it for this render, and it's going to add a lot of extra time to your render that you just don't need. You can also go into the save settings under render settings and check save for compositing project file, target application After Effects as the default, and just go ahead and check these other boxes, relative and 3D data, and say save project file, and we'll go ahead and put it in the same place as our renders here. And what it does is it'll save an AEC file that you can now bring into After Effects along with your image sequence, and you'll have the camera and lights just as they were in Cinema. Watch the magic happen.